It was inevitable. That doesn't make it any less painful. Your Toronto FC have been eliminated from the 2021 MLS Cup playoffs. Well, we'll talk a bit about how they got here, what comes next for the club, and plenty more on this week's edition of Waking the Red Weekly, presented by Footy Talks. We can think of no better guest to help us do that than James Grossi of TorontoFC.ca. He'll join us in 15 minutes or less for pretty extended talk about the team and the season, but certainly wasn't all doom and gloom. I want to mention that before we get too down. This week, we witnessed a pretty monumental moment at BMO Field for the Canadian men's national team, and the Canadian women's national team will open up their celebration tour this week as well. So there's plenty to celebrate on that end. But first, no Michael Singh this week. Hopefully, we can all get together again at some point soon. It's been a couple of weeks of absences, but Jeffrey Pinesker's back. So how you doing, Jeff? It's been a while.
Yeah, happy to be back. I had to miss last week for cat issues. It's funny. Other people have pets and they go to the vet and they spend a lot of money and they have a causality for it. Like Rex ate this thing or Molly got into that thing. My cat has like emotional nervous breakdowns and then he's just better. But we don't know what was wrong with him in the first place. So this is turning into a wonderful trend. But yeah, my cat had a very expensive existential crisis last weekend, and it caused me to not be able to attend. So I apologize to all. But I'm back to discuss what the hell's going on with one set of Reds, and to celebrate what's going on with two other sets of Reds. So.
Yeah. Well, Toronto FC had a pretty expensive existential crisis of their own this season, I think. So we can definitely get into that a lot over the next
segue. Yeah. Nice. You're always thinking segue. I love it.
100%. Jeff's talking about his poor cat, and I'm just like, all right, how do I transition?
How do I spin this into soccer stuff?
Exactly.
So yeah, we're eliminated from the playoffs. You wanna start there? I didn't see the game actually. I was in a bad internet zone, so I only watched the highlights, and from what I saw, it looked like it was a real humdinger.
Yeah, I mean, I saw minimal amounts of the game as well, which I think I don't think it's necessary to really get into the nuts and bolts of games at this point in the season when we all knew this was coming for, I don't know, it seems like months now. We basically knew the season was over and diagnosed it as such. And we've just been waiting for that final confirmation, which we again knew was coming sooner rather than later. And yeah, like we said, it's not a shock to anyone, but I mean, it's certainly not where we thought we would end up this season. It's certainly not where the club hoped they'd end up this season. And yeah, again, even after the tough start, and I know there were a lot of warning bells with the way Toronto FC started the season and got rid of Chris Armas. Like, yeah, I think we dragged it out for so long because, one, we've seen this club turn seasons around. I mean, 2019's an example of where they started out quite poorly with the Independiente debacle, and then were very quickly able to turn that around and make some signings that got them back, and obviously to an MLS Cup final.
Yeah.
Two, they very similar roster to the year before, and obviously that team was a Supporters Shield group. But yeah, I mean, it very quickly became clear that nope, there's no turnaround in sight, and we head into this offseason with a ton of major questions.
Yeah, we sure do. I mean, I doubt either of us know this, but James might offhand. Did we find out that we aren't qualified for the playoffs at around the same point in the season as 2018 or later? It feels like later. I mean, what are there, 4 games left in the season? 3 games left in the season? It definitely feels like we were in it in 2018 a bit longer. There was a bit more pain at the end of 2018. I mean, and then there's also recency bias, right? Like having been through 2018, this was a lot easier to take because, there's that sort of, it's not too far in our collective memory that whimper of a season that occurred. Speaking of whimpers of title defending seasons, yay Columbus. They're having the same kind of luck as we did post MLS Cup win. And it can't be a rosy environs for the Columbus Crew fans.
They did win 4-0 this weekend, though, didn't they?
Yeah. They're still not going to make the playoffs, and if
No,
they do,
fair.
it'll be a
Yeah, that's fair,
a
yeah.
turnaround.
I didn't realize how
of
far below that red line they'd gotten.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing our you were telling me about our parlay picks that we'll do later, and we were discussing Inter Miami, and I, at this point, I'm predisposed for Toronto to lose every game for the rest of the season. But Inter Miami, oh my God, what's going on with that club? Oh my goodness gracious, they bad, they super duper bad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that raises an interesting question, Mitch. Like, New England are going to run away with the points record, and there'll be an asterisk on it because it's a deserved asterisk.
Why?
Because this season's wacky styles, right? It's not a COVID season, but it's a half COVID season.
I don't know.
It's not.
Yeah. Sorry, continue with your point. I don't know if I agree on the asterisks, though.
Oh, I absolutely think an asterisk. There are still teams that, for the sake of, Toronto still had to play a decent chunk of the season with their home ground being an away ground. They're in our conference. There's an asterisk on there. There has to be. I mean, most MLS seasons would have an asterisk because they keep changing the damn rules. But this one has a bit of a COVID asterisk. That, like, not to take away from the excitement that New England are certainly going to have, and good for them, but I'm throwing an asterisk on there. So to me, it's a bit of a mulligan. Maybe not for TFC, because we maybe should have known better, having come off the back of a season where we were sort of a club without a home. But Columbus, I think Columbus fans can take a bit of comfort in the New England asterisks that I've decided to put on their accolades for the year, because that's the way I roll. I'll throw this question to you, Mitch. Does that give TFC a bit of a mulligan, or not at all?
No, I mean, certainly more of a mulligan than 2018. Although, again, like similar. Like the 2018 obviously had the start of the season and all the injuries that came from that CONCACAF Champions League run, so missing the playoffs was different there. But I think this year, I don't think there's a big asterisk on it. We know, well, one, because the club came out right from the start of the season and said we don't want you to put an asterisk on anything. Like, that's not our internal feeling. That's not that's not what we want remembered for the season. So I don't think there's a big asterisk on it. I think obviously it had an impact. There's no question about that. But again, they made.
I mean, talk is cheap. I'd really like to love goat cheese more, but I can say it. I can scream it from the mountaintops, but that won't necessarily make it true. So I think the fact that TFC we're trying to get in front of that mulligan asterisk garbage at the outset of the season, like, listen, we don't want this to be an issue, was kind of them saying it's going to be an issue in a roundabout way. So I don't know. I'd be curious what our man Grossi has to say about that, because I was very, very much on the side of just handing out mulligans and get out of jail free cards at the outset of the season, even when Armas was the Armas TFC was falling apart. And I think there's still some mulligans to give out here. And it's not just me being a homer, because obviously I'm taking away accolades from Bruce Arena's squad. So I'm an equal opportunity asterisk thrower, because it has been a wild and wacky season. I don't know if I wouldn't even know where to start doing the research, but I think the amount of injuries across the league are probably up on a team by team basis. Soft tissue injuries, training injuries, stuff like that. Condensed schedule, you've got the Campeones Cup, you've got whatever the League's Cup was. I'm really not sure what the US Open did this year in terms of adjusting, but for the Canadian team, certainly we haven't even played the 2020 final yet. So it's a big old mess. There's a lot of inertia left over from 2020 that we're sort of dealing with now. Let's not dilly-dally. We got the man with the hat and all the answers ready to log in. So I'm gonna bring him on board, and there's the man.
What
Good morning, gentlemen.
Yeah,
Morning, James.
No pressure there. All the answers after this season. That's yeah. But now joined by James Grossi is his official name, TorontoFC.ca. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, of course, James.
It's my pleasure, boys. I'm looking forward to providing some of the answers. I won't say that I have the answers, but
I'm going to take points.
Put it that way.
I'm taking points for every non-answer, James, because you're supposed to have
fair.
them all.
That's fair.
And we'll give you your score later.
Cool.
Yeah, well, let's get into, I guess, the big topic.
Tear into it.
Top here. Yeah, Toronto FC, of course, eliminated from the playoffs this past weekend. I know we've already tried to parse through a couple of different things in the first 10 minutes and gotten, not really anywhere, but
treading water.
Yeah, exactly. What for you was maybe the biggest factor in the team not reaching the postseason this year?
Yeah, well, there's never just one thing. So when I think about this, like all of the myriad factors sort of run through the mind. You have having to start the season in Florida and all the complications that came with that, and you sort of wondered heading into this year how the team would build on what they did last year. I think, looking back now with the knowledge that we have from this season, what they achieved in terms of being in the Supporters' Shield race and, falling at the first hurdle in the playoffs, but really showing themselves well with all the difficulties that last year had. You wondered how they were going to be able to do that again. And I think we all sort of underestimated how difficult it was going to be to have to do it again. When I look back, I think that they sort of survived last year by just sort of taking it one game at a time and not worrying about the outside world. And I think that's how a lot of us dealt with last year, was just like, all right, what's the next thing that I have to do? And so when it came time to try and do that again, the reserves just weren't there. So I start with that Florida thing, and then you build into that the fact that, Greg Venny leaves, and he was such a key figure in all the success that we've seen this team have over the last half decade or whatever it was. And it was always going to be difficult to replace him when that time came, and for it to happen in the circumstances that it did was a double whammy, And then you take Armas, and my thoughts on Armas have sort of evolved with time, and this is something we can talk about a little bit later, but I kind of felt like the team that we saw really put Cincinnati and Chicago to the sword was a bit what Armas was trying to do with this club. We can talk about that a little bit later if you like.
I do.
but that sort of came at a difficult time for the club, and you're trying to juggle being in Florida. You're juggling a transition to a new coach. You're juggling implementing some extra ideas, and then on top of that, you lose Alejandro Pozuelo early in the year. You lose Josie Altidore through injury and through off-field complications and everything like that. And when you look back at the lineups this team has put out, there hasn't been one drop of consistency throughout the whole year.
Not even one. Yep.
And so, you bring in guys like Soteldo, and you bring in Dwyer, and you bring in Lawrence, and you're asking these guys to step into a team that thinks it should be in one place and finds itself in a very different one. And it's always so complicated to adjust to new surroundings, let alone ones where it's struggling. But, you asked for the biggest factor, and I think the biggest factor is that at no point in this whole year were they able to establish a foundation. They weren't able to get that bit of solid footing that everyone needs, every team needs, whether it's in soccer and life, that this is the platform from which we are going to build our identity, and we're going to build some momentum, and we're going to build some consistency, and they haven't been able to do that. The funny thing is that that's very much been what Javi has been trying to do, and he's had some success, to varying degrees, and there have been ups and downs, but it's one of the things that I was thinking as the team went into the October break was that it didn't feel like a team entering, month 7 or month 8 of the season. It felt like a team entering month 3 of the season. And it was an incongruity that struck me as hilarious, but also poignant in the sense that, this team is very much hit rock bottom with that defeat in that I don't think we're going to be. We'll dust it off in a couple of years and look back at it and remember it as a time when things went awry. But for me, this is a team that's picked itself back up and is still trying to figure itself out with the time that they have remaining here.
Yeah, I would interject that there's just been so many false dawns, right? Like moving back to BMO was supposed to be the epochal moment where it all made sense, and then we pulled like the most frustrating 1-1 draws for endlessly. Do you know what I mean? There were so many false dawns, and like you said, there was absolutely no consistency. I think that's a very, very fair assessment. To go a bit macro, when you bring up 2019 and the signings that hit, right? Pause was a coup, not just in terms of the wheeling and dealing, like how well it made the front office look with respect to how they were able to get the deal over the line. But he had an instant effect on the pitch. And the same goes for Omar Gonzalez, right? Let's talk about their equivalents in the 2021 squad. Jefferson Soteldo and Kamar Lawrence. Very different report card for those two signings, right? Do you think that that's? I'm gonna go full macro here. Like let's compare and contrast. Are they a symptom of the environment or is it bad recruitment?
I put it down in more of the symptom of the environment that they find themselves in. Like, let's go back to that 2019, and you have a guy like Paz who's at the top of his game coming in good form from Europe, and you have a guy like Omar coming in from Mexico who's coming into a familiar environment in a lot of ways. He's playing with Josie, he's playing with Michael, he's playing in a league that he knows well, and so you get two guys that are at a certain point in their career where they're ready to embrace the new challenge, and they come into a stable team.
Mm-hmm.
And if you contrast that with Soteldo, who's very young in terms of the game still, and still has a lot of growing to do, and this is a stepping stone for him as far as we can sort of tell. And you come into a team that is just
a shambles.
Yeah. It was. I can think of several words, but I'm not going to use any. It was not the best environment for a guy like that to come into, especially a guy that plays the way that he plays, where I'm getting the sense that he's not the kind of guy that'll do it himself. A lot of people made that Seba comparison and the thought that, he's going to take the team on his back, he's going to pick the ball up at midfield and dash through 20 people and score with a back heel,
Yeah.
And for a guy who's a connective piece, the way that Soteldo looks to be, you can't come into a team and succeed when you don't have any runners. One of the things that struck me a lot about him is that he's so frustrating to watch because he'll beat a player, and it seems like instead of trying to take advantage of that and to use that to do something, he'd rather beat the player again.
Yep.
It almost seems like it's a chronic issue of he likes beating the guys. He doesn't really care what happens after that. And there might be an element of that, but I think a lot of it has to do with he hasn't really had the support around him, and he hasn't really had the pieces around him to make the most of that. Too often he's been isolated. Like, how many times have we seen him do that where it's him and three defenders and no other TFC players within half a pitch, And so, I still think with Soteldo, like when you add a guy like that, you're not adding him for the short term, you're adding him for the long term. And I think that was what we saw with Pozuelo as well, where, he hit the ground running, but that's sort of what you would expect from a guy who's been the best player in the league in Europe for a couple of years and had his ups and downs as a professional.
Sure.
For a young guy who's still figuring it out, like a lot of this stuff, it hits differently and they react differently.
Yeah.
You're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard a lot from people, because I've been pretty vocal of my disapproval of Yaf, trying to correct me with respect
that
to
knowing nod.
Well, trying to correct me by saying, he's coming from the Brazilian league, and the Brazilian league is a very showy league, the Brazilian domestic league. It rewards that kind of individual brilliance. They tend to recruit players that it's like the Harlem Globetrotter kind of player, like the Flash and et cetera, et cetera. I will say this, though, Pause was billed to us. There were two things we were worried about when Pause came. One, that he'd be exhausted because he was coming off a full season. And two, that he wouldn't be a goal scorer, that he'd be a pure number 10. And his debut, he's chipping people like they're going out of style, right? It's an unfair comparison. But, I wanted to make it all the same. Now, let's go to Kamar Lawrence, right? Because there's a very similar they're both on redemption tours, right? Kamar went to Belgium. It didn't quite work out. And Omar went to Mexico, and it didn't quite work out for him there either. But the difference is staggering, right? Like, is Kamar's sort of mishit, and I'm remiss to call it a mishit because playing him at center back has been like a Gregory Vanderweel kind of situation where like maybe he's better in that position than what we hired him for. But just as long as he doesn't get into fisticuffs with Javi, we're good to go. No handbags. But you know, is this disconnect with Kamar because he was brought in by Armas, and then the center fell out from underneath him, or is it just because he's a very different kind of player than Omar?
It's a tough one because we never really get inside a guy's head, you know.
Yeah.
And so he comes here, and I remember the first day we talked to him, and he was talking about how this was if he was going to come back to MLS, this was the situation he wanted to be in because it was a team that was going to be competing for championships. It was a team that, you know, played with a certain amount of swagger, and I think he thought that fit him well, and it was going to be a place where he could lift trophies and he could enjoy his football. And you know, we got a pretty rude awakening pretty quickly upon getting here, and then all of a sudden the guy that brought you in, who you thought you were gonna, you know, go to battle with, is out the door, and you're sort of wondering what you've gotten yourself into. And
right,
you know, you add in the whole he's moving to Canada, the family's in, I believe his family was based in New York, all those sort of complications getting into a new city the team's playing, like the same stuff we talked about for the team as a whole. In a lot of ways, I almost feel like it's a little bit not unfair because it's the nature of the gig to sort of critique these guys and see what's going on, but we're lacking so much information on how things might be in a normal time. And so, you know, I like you had a lot of questions about Kamar in terms of what we saw from him the first little while. He seemed distracted. He seemed like his mind was elsewhere. And you know, there was one match where before the game he was talking about how the team was going to be different and they'd sorted all the problems out, and then they go out and concede 2 goals in the first 5 minutes.
I remember that game.
What are you talking about? Like,
but it reminded me of that Terrence Boyd press conference where he's like, "Everyone's gonna love me. I'm an animal," and then no, it didn't happen that way.
Sometimes things go awry, and sometimes there's no way back, and sometimes things go awry, and there's a way to redemption for guys. And I think, like you said, what we've seen from Kamar recently in terms of playing that center back role, but also just even at the fullback spot, he's been a real tenacious defender, and he's been one of the team's best players for the last couple of months. And you know, you're losing a guy like Justin Morrow, who was a leader both on and off the field, and you need somebody to really step into that role. And you know, Kamar's got that swagger, and he's got the defensive bite, and he's got the ability to go forward and do things. So I'm not ready to write him off as being a mistake yet. I think it's just one of those things where this year did not go to plan for a lot of people, man.
For the universe, like the universe didn't expect
that's fair.
You know, I love it that you call for empathy, right? Because I'm so quick at this point, and this might be just my frustration talking. I want to call for empathy, but I'm also like, how much rope are we giving professional athletes, right? Like when we start getting into like talking about feelings, I think we lose the plot a little bit, where it's like these guys are being paid handsomely. Sure, life sucks right now. Do you know what I mean? Like for everyone, but also time pauses for no one, right? And if at a certain point, it's put up or shut up time, right? So I love the calls for empathy because I feel like we lose too much of that perspective sometimes when we get on our soapbox and start ranting about performance and mental state and all that other thing. But I also I have to keep pulling it back to, are we here because we're in a support group, or are we here to compete for trophies, right? And we can't get soft. We can't get that soft, right? Like that has to be item number one,
And it's very fair, but at the same time, when a team succeeds, we want to get into that mindset and see what it was about that allowed them to succeed.
Sure.
And so the flip side of that point is when a team struggles, there is a mental side of that as well.
Absolutely. You're so smart. You're such a smart guy. My goodness.
Did I get a point for that one?
Oh, you got many points. We're doing the Clive Anderson point system. So I give you like 1,000 here, and I take away. It's totally arbitrary, but
this like symptom of environment is such an interesting one as well here, because I've been thinking about that a lot this week in the performances recently of particularly Richie Larea, but also Jonathan Osorio, with how they've been playing for the Canadian men's national team and how much belief they play with and how much, like again, Richie Larea looks like two different players. Not that he's been particularly bad for Toronto FC this season, but certainly I think if you talk to him, he wouldn't be as impressed with how he's played for TFC. And you keep expecting him to come back from Canada camp and just be able to hit those same strides, but he's never quite the same, which obviously makes this offseason interesting because
Yep.
you have to think of that factor when you're considering the players on your roster and, which guys are actually not up to standards and which guys are, maybe having an off season because everything around them is just not clicking.
Yeah, no, exactly. Richie and John are two of the case, like they've both been solid for Toronto. So other ones look bad, but the way that they take to the field, the attitude change is just so different. And to make it very explicit, the way that the team reacts when Canada concedes a goal versus the way that TFC reacts when they concede a goal is just night and day.
Yep.
And so much of that is the confidence stuff, and it's the looks that you give each other in the locker room, and it's the feeling on the bus ride to the stadium or whatever it may be. And as we talk about momentum going in a good way when things are good, it goes the other way when things are bad, and it does make this offseason really hard because how much wiggle room do you allow for the fact that so many people have been dealing with so many things that maybe it's not been the best representation of themselves, and how many people do you just have to sort of say, well, that may have been a factor, but we're going to go in a different direction. And it's going to be one of the more fascinating elements, one of the more fascinating turnovers that we've seen in TFC history, because I think we all knew that this was a team that was in need of remaking itself, and I think the Pozuelo edition was sort of the beginning of that, bringing in the next guy who's going to be the talisman for the team.
Yep.
And then I think with the pandemic, it really sort of took a pause, and you couldn't really bring guys in because of how messed up everything was in a lot of ways. And I know how you feel about the
and yet we did. Couldn't really bring a guy in, but here he is.
Sometimes you got to strike when the iron is hot, and when they sell him to Manchester United for $40 million in 3 years, you're gonna love this deal, and you will have always been.
I'll eat all the crow. I mean, there's two things I wanted to mention. Wheels was on the One Soccer Today show talking about the changeover, and his suggestion was to roll this team again, which I think is insane. And you just brought that up. Like I hope that isn't. I hope that they land on the brutal side more than they land on the mulligan side. With respect to what you were saying previously, like we realize that this was a tough year for you. We have a standard here. You didn't meet it. We wish you all the best. And I don't want to. I'm not naming names. But getting back to what you wanted to come back to. What would you grade Armas if you had to give him a report card? Because you said that interesting thing where you said some of our wins long after the fact were kind of Armas ball. And then what would you give Javi? What grade would you give Javi?
I'm not exactly sure what the grading scale is here, but I think for Armas, it clearly has to be an F or a D or whatever it is, whatever your lowest grade possible is, because the job was to come in and keep a team that had been at the top there or thereabouts, and that clearly didn't happen, and I think he himself would tell you that there were so many times post match where he put the losses on himself, and he said that he wasn't good enough or he needed to find solutions and stuff like that, and clearly that didn't happen in his time here. And so, I'm loath to fail somebody on something like that, but I think if you put it in that really stark terms of you came in with this one mission of keeping this team that had been a Supporters' Shield challenger up there, and then you didn't, so that's stuff,
Yeah.
What I've been thinking about and what I sort of alluded with, and I've been wrestling was I think we sort of got, when he started to use the term pressing, giving the way that term has been used in soccer media the last 5 years or whatever it's been.
Our tails all got wagging.
our tails got wagging, but we also misunderstood what he meant in a certain way. Like TFC was never going to be, a bunch of 20-year-old Red Bull products that were running around the field and closing everything down. But, you didn't have the bodies, you didn't have the legs, but the general idea of sort of playing more quickly and looking to create turnovers in dangerous spots and playing more vertically can be done in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to be that high octane 90-minute madness sort of thing. And so when I reference the Cincinnati and Chicago thing, like I think Soteldo and Schaffelberg and Achara forcing turnovers in the opponent's end with a little bit of pressure, turning that into it. Like I think that was what Armas was talking about. And so I know it's a little bit of revisionist history, and I'm open to that. I just think that sometimes we latch on to little things and make too much of them without sort of getting behind what exactly that means. And then when it all falls apart and we can't talk to people anymore, and the team sort of shuts down those lines of conversation, then we're sort of left.
Hey man,
wondering
remember when he said we had 2 number 1 keepers, and he was like, he was burnt at the stake for that comment for a good 6 months when Westberg wasn't getting any minutes. People on WTR were like, but he said we have 2 goalkeepers. What? He said it in passing. Yeah, I would give, on that binary scale, I'd give him an F as well. Mitch, you too? That being said, the caveat here is he was hired under the weirdest circumstances, right? Like, as he was introduced, it was like, well, we don't want to mess with continuity, but here comes this guy that's going to reinvent the wheel. Remember Michael Bradley? We know he's old, but he's going to be super striker now. Like, and it made no sense. So there's a certain accountability there. And I said it really eloquently the last time I was on the show, but I'll try again. I don't think Vieira was ever coming. I don't think Laurent Blanc was ever coming. I think they had designs on these guys, but once it got past the initial, here's my business card, here's yours, they're like, wait a second, we're going to be where for how many months? And they're like, no, forget about it. And so Armas was the guy. Yeah, but you can't go. We're in Disney World, but you can look at it. You can look at Space Mountain, but you can't go there. And I think, Armas was all that was left, right? Like Ali's Rolodex was paper thin at that point, and it was yeah.
I wouldn't say all that was left. I think it might have been the best candidate. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like you can always find somebody, and given the circumstances of a team that doesn't really need a whole lot of. This is going to sound more derogatory.
No, you're fair. Jason Bent was right there. Like yeah.
This was a team that I don't think they needed a lot of coaching. You just sort of needed somebody to go out there and motivate them and light a fire under them after what had been an exhausting 10 months. And I think I can see how you take a guy like Chris, who was, ebullient with his energy, was sort of effervescent in the way that he spoke about things and was moving in 1,000 different directions and was never going to let people rest comfortably with the disappointments. And I think in a way they set themselves up for failure with that sort of no excuse things, because half the time excuses are reasons. Like that's sort of how things work. The reasons sound like excuses, but they're reasons.
Absolutely.
So shutting that down sort of removes an outlet from yourself that you might have had to further examine things or to further explain things or to speak more frankly about things. And I think that was a bit of a loss for the team early on. But I think I've been listening to you guys the last couple of weeks, and somebody made reference to the Thierry Henry departure and that sort of being a warning sign that and Greg Vanny himself saying that this wasn't something that he thought he could do for another year. I think when the story of this season gets told in the next 10 years, we're going to talk about how almost ridiculous it was to expect a professional sports team to compete with their peers, given the disadvantages they had. And we can look at Montreal, look at Vancouver. They're both on the cusp of the playoffs, but I think they're very different teams. They're much younger teams. Yeah, they're teams with a bit less of an identity than TFC has, and a bit lower standards, and sometimes when things slip, it's really hard to pick that back up. Whereas if you're building something, you can sort of take things on a little more readily, if you know what I mean.
That's like 4,000 or 5,000 points right there. Let's move to Javi's report card. What would you give him? B?
I think yeah, B is what I have down in my notes, and it's just because I think he's done a lot of good things, but again, like the job was to somehow salvage the season, and this is another one of those points where, you know, defining terms, like what does salvage mean when you find yourself 15 games into the season and have, you know, single digit points? Like, does salvage mean getting to the playoffs, which is what I think a lot of us interpreted it to mean, or does salvage mean at least make sure that this doesn't carry on into next year? And I think, you know, it's clear that they're not going to be making the playoffs this season, but I think that they're putting themselves in a good position to build towards next season, having cleared out some of the cobwebs that this one left behind. And so
absolutely
B. Yeah, B.
So Yvonne asked you, do you feel comfortable with Javi getting the TFC full-time coaching job next year?
I do, in the sense that I'm always such a bad judge of this, because I sort of like a coach that excuse me, that explains themselves well, and that I think has a good way of approaching the game, and that I think is really thinking things through and making decisions not for reasons of pride, but for reasons because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And I have a lot of sympathy for Javi with that. I thought, you know, we all made a big deal about Michael Bradley being taken off the pitch, or Michael Bradley not in the starting lineup, and Javi's explanation was just sort of dumbfounded that was even a question, because it was the right decision for the team. And it was, he gave us the same explanation when we asked about Jaquil coming off after having been subbed on. He was just sort of like, no, it's not a big deal. That's what the team needed at the time. So, you know, I see a lot of utility in that. I see a lot of value in a coach who espouses some of the ethoses. I don't know how to pluralize that, actually. And the principle.
I think it's a singular. I mean, you lost 1,000 points there. I'm just letting you know.
Somebody who has the sort of principles, I like that. So I like a lot of what Javi has brought to this group. But at the same time, you know, he was as much a part of the team not being there in the first half of the season as he was of it being there in the second half of the season, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah,
he was in that group when those decisions were being made. He was there as all of this was happening. So
yeah,
it comes down a lot to where this team thinks it is. I think if we're seeing, if this is going to be like a dressing room clean out situation and a start from scratch, which I don't think it ever is going to be, but if that is the general sentiment within the group, then you probably want to establish somebody who is going to have a strong vision for what's going to come forward.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you are more looking to keep things ticking over, if you are more looking to how you want the academy to play and TFC 2 to play and how that feeds into the first team, I think you could make a lot worse decisions than having Javi stay in place. So I'm definitely comfortable with it. It's another one of those things where, is it Laurent Blanc or Patrick Vieira? No. You know, does that necessarily mean that it's bad? No. Like it's one of those things that, like, we can speculate it going forward and we can talk about it afterwards, but until it happens, it's all sort of just chatter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right there with you, man. I absolutely have no problem with Javi keeping the keys to the car with more responsibility next year. I mean, we've been talking about what happened when we changed horses in the off season at the beginning of this season. So I don't know why we're so why we're so heaven set on doing it all over again. He's won the respect of the locker room, you know, and I think that can't be understated. This locker room was probably really messy. Nature abhors a vacuum. They've reached some kind of equanimity or some kind of standard now.
You lost them.
Yeah, I know. I also think I think it does ride on our performance in the Can Champ and the Voyagers Cup. I do think that has some huge ramifications as to whether he can sign a lease in his apartment for next year, or whether or not he should be looking elsewhere. Sorry to interrupt, Mitch. What do you got going?
There goes the garage door.
Nice.
But on top of that, what I have, I guess kind of picking up on that, and you know, now that they are eliminated from the playoffs, we mentioned the Canadian Championship is the big thing right now. obviously should be the big focus for this club. They, obviously not much else before, but you still have those remaining games. What's the focus there? Are you trying to get, Pozuelo, Altidore back in the setup and see how they can work together with Soteldo, stuff like that? Or we know Jaquil Marshall-Rudy is going to start against Miami. Do you see what you have in some of these young guys as well? I mean, you have however many minutes to evaluate here. Can't waste those minutes, even if they on paper seem pointless.
Yeah. I was a little bit surprised when Javi told us that Jaquil was going to get the start. I was just asking him about the substitution and if he had to have a little conversation with him afterwards just to explain. Mm-hmm. He was like, "Oh, he's a very matter of fact sort of guy, Javi," and so it was interesting. And this has been sort of like going back a couple months now. It's been something that's been ruminating in everyone's mind. Was like, how is TFC going to sort of approach this time? Is it better to just scrap everything and throw guys out there? And all those conversations have been had. I was tempted to dust off the old blog and write something about this, but then all the yelling to play the kids has sort of died down, so it hasn't quite yet. And I could never really put my fingers on quite what the right words to describe what it was that was going on, but I think there was something in what Javi said about Jaquil getting the start that sort of, highlights what it was that I was trying to hit on. And that was, it wasn't that they were giving Jaquil the start because he had to come off early. It wasn't that because now that the team is eliminated, it's the right time to give guys minutes. It was because he has earned it and because he is one of the best 11 players that they have. And so I think that sort of mentality is a lot of what's made this team what it has been. That sort of, you don't just do things for doing things sake. You do things because it's for the best of the team. And if we look at any of the young players that have gotten a chance this season, whether it's Ralph Priso or Jacob Schaffelberg or Noble Okello or Luke Singh, it's almost been an injury or an emergency that's gotten them that chance. And some of them have seized it and made the most of it, and some of them have not. And so what I sort of think is that, ideally you would like to find windows for these guys to get their chances. And this was something that even Greg Vanny talked about back in the day, was that it's really hard to find those right windows where you can set guys up to be successful. And we've seen a lot of that this year too, where guys sort of get thrown to the wolves in a team that can't protect them. So ideally you'd like to find those moments, but when the team is in a situation where every game is must win, those moments are going to be pretty small and pretty, few and far between. I don't think that changes going forward in terms of they now have 5 games or whatever it is to prepare for Pacific. You have Pozuelo coming back off of an injury. You have Josie Altidore trying to find some form of shape, and you have the need to and the back line that needs to get itself together and figure out, is Chris Mavinga going to be involved? Is Omar there? Is Kamar there? Who's playing where? So they have a lot of questions to sort out over this next little while. What I will say though is that, if you're trying to get Michael Bradley ready for a game on November 3rd, maybe that little stretch in October where you're at Atlanta 3 days earlier, maybe he doesn't have to play that day. Yeah. Maybe if Pozuelo is feeling something, you give him 60 minutes, you give him a half, and you get a half hour for guys or something like that. So I think we will see windows, but I wouldn't expect it to be a wholesale change with the factoring in that now that the priority is the Canadian Championship, other possibilities open up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, away at Atlanta, get Mitch Tainter back in there, get the kids in there. Let's run it back here. I
thought you were going to say get Mitch Tierney in there, and I was like, did you just plug yourself to go play for TFC? That one game back in footy as a center back, and you're like ready to suit up for the first team. Do you want to switch our order and talk about TFC 2 before we go to men's national team? So it's not
whatever you guys want.
Yeah,
sure, yeah. I guess obviously there is one Toronto FC affiliated team who still is in the playoff hunt because the USL League One is ridiculous. And I looked at the standings today and I was going to do some sort of math. And then very quickly I was like, no, this is just, is just too crazy because just about every team, only 2 teams have clinched. There's couple of games left in the season. Only 2 teams have clinched, and I think only 1 or 2 teams can't make the playoffs right now. So the permutations are just ridiculous in terms of how it all plays out. But TFC 2, they're on a winning streak. They've won, I think it's 3 on the trot now. James, I guess a little bit, what's the lay of the land, and maybe some key contributors who have helped Toronto FC Toronto FC 2 rather get into this position where, you know, they're at least in the hunt for the playoffs as the season where winds
how many games left? You danced over that one sentence. How many games are left in the season?
2, I think.
First thing,
Yeah, 2 games.
The first ever 3-game winning streak in TFC 2 history.
Let's celebrate
For some of the darker seasons that this group has had, and you know, there were a handful of back-to-back wins, but never 3 in a row.
Nice.
So, heading into Friday night's match against Fort Lauderdale of Beckham and Neville progeny, Fort Lauderdale, TFC 2 has 2 games remaining, and they are 1 point out of a playoff spot. Let me just see if I can dig up my synopsis here.
Do you have a chart with all these?
I do not.
Does it look like Charlie Day's wall in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
It was one of the craziest seasons I've ever sort of kept my eyes on. About a month and a half ago, it wasn't 2 teams had clinched and 2 were eliminated. It was from 3rd to 10th were separated by 3 points or 4 points or something ridiculous like that. And
that's insane.
And so heading into these final 2 weekends, TFC find themselves 1 point out. But there are 4. So basically, there are 4 teams competing for 2 spots. New England is on 37 points, I think it is. Tucson is on 36, and then TFC and somebody else that I'm blanking on right now are
Tacoma
on 30 or whatever it is. No, I don't. I think Tacoma's in proper USL, not USL League One.
All right, Forward Madison.
Anyway.
I'm just gonna throw out team names until I hit
Forward
the right
Madison
one.
DJ Club.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's four teams separated by 2 points, battling for 2 spots heading into the last 2 games of the season. It's sort of the situation. And TFC play Fort Lauderdale at the BMO training ground on Friday, and they play the New England Revolution's 2nd team again at the training ground the following Friday. And I just found out that that the stadium is open up for fans who would like to go to the match. You know, proof of vaccination will be required and everything like that, but that's becoming a thing. They want to get some supporters up there to cheer the boys on, and it's been a dramatic season, and it's going to be a dramatic finish. However, it sort of ends up playing out. In terms of the key contributors, I have to sort of start with Dante Campbell, who was very much on the outsides of this group through the first couple months of the season. He was a bit of an invisible character. He wasn't getting regular minutes, and as things have turned around for them upon coming home, he's been a real midfield general for the group. He's been the real driving force in the middle of the park. You know, I always sort of struggle how to describe somebody who doesn't do really tangible things. You know, he's not playing that final ball. He's not scoring the goals. He's making the tackles, and he's making the game ugly for the other team, and he's making not the pass that leads to the goal, and not the pass that leads to the pass that leads to the goal, but the pass that leads to the pass that leads to, like, he's deep down in the pass chain, but he's doing so many good things, and just sort of being that emotional heartbeat for a team that really needed somebody to stabilize and somebody to urge them forward. And I had the chance to speak to him a couple of weeks ago, and granted, I hadn't talked to him since he was like a 16-year-old, but the amount of maturity that I sort of saw in this young man, I think he's only 20 or something like that, and the way that he has really absorbed that sort of team ethos at TFC that we were talking about earlier sort of struck me for a guy who you know was a young up and comer, you know, sort of full of promise, but also full of that sort of youthful. No, what's the word that I'm looking for here? That sort of youthful. I don't know. I think when young
naivete.
players have talent, there's a naivety, but there's also like a cocksureness. You know what I mean? Like a confidence that comes with it, and that will eventually get bashed down. You know, it's not going to happen right away, but at some point you're going to hit a wall that will only get you so far. And so, finding what you have behind that is really important for these young pros. And I think I can say he's a guy who's found that that extra level of depth that'll drive him forward wherever his career may take him. And then, so I start with him, and then I look at the fullbacks. Luca Petrasso and Kobe Franklin have been, it's not maybe nowadays it's not too weird to say that fullbacks have really been the driving force of a team's attack, but these two have been lights out for the last couple of years. I think Franklin has 4 assists in the last 3 games. Petrasso has a goal and an assist in the last 3 games, and if you go back to a match against Richmond in August, he had a wonderful little back heel to Carlini that led to a game winner on a day that they really needed it. They're full of running. They're competent and combative defensively, which you always want from players that are nominally defenders. But they're willing and eager to get forward. Franklin has just been devastating from out wide. His 2 balls for Paul Rothrock on the weekend were just inch perfect balls, and you always need the guy to get on the end and place them perfectly, but sometimes the cross is as good as the goal, and both of those sort of fall into that category. And Petrasso is he reminds me a fair bit of his brother with a bit of a bigger frame, and he's got that silkiness, and he's got that drive forward, and he's got that sort of professionalism about him that's always required at these levels. And if we had spoken earlier in the year, I think McLaughlin, the striker, Garrett would have been one of the guys that we were talking about, but he's sort of gone off the boil a little bit, which is
he's
understandable in a second season as a professional. But Paul Rothrock, a draft pick, has really stepped into that role, and he's not the biggest guy in terms of a striker. I think I was speaking with the coach, and the coach said he's only about 5'8" or something like that, but he plays so much bigger than he is. He just harries defenders, and he covers every inch of grass and challenges for every ball. And he's got 3 goals, I think it is, in the last 3 games, and so he's a guy that's really been behind this. And then Kevin Pauletts, who's a Red Bulls Academy guy who joined after bouncing around. I think he was at Hartford last year, and he strikes me as perhaps the most MLS ready of the center back crew down there. And he's a real he's a quiet leader. He puts out fires. He's one of those guys who leads from the back and can be a real sort of a real sort of foundational stone for this group. He's just calm and does what has to be done and steps up big. He scored the header for a game winner the other day as well against New England. I'm loath to leave out the rest of the guys. Everyone's put in a shift, and guys blow hot cold throughout the season. But I think I should mention I'm pretty big on Carlini and I'm pretty big on Temi, although I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his last name. I still have no idea. But that's probably a good enough little.
That's a good primer. That's a good bluffers guy. Absolutely. You want to do it? You want to do the question that you already told me you're going to rip me apart on, or do you want to just move on to? I'm not going to rip you apart on. I just need to. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it as written to give you maximum points. Why is there such a disconnect between the way TFC 2 plays and the first team? This can't be best practices? ? What's wrong? ?
Yeah.
Well, Jeff,
my first as I foreshadowed was what do you mean by disconnect? What do you mean when you say disconnect?
Oh, what? Oh, no, I'm getting asked a question. Oh, great. I knew I shouldn't have done that. Just, I think it may be beyond that we're playing at a different level. It may be attributable to, the teams being in different countries and the fact that TFC 2 didn't even play a season last year. But, on paper, your first and your second team should sort of share some points in terms of identity. And maybe the fact that the first team has none right now is the real answer here. But it just seems a lot more smash and grab. And I don't know. I find a disconnect. Please tell me why I'm wrong. Pardon?
Two seems more smash and grab than the first team. Is that what you mean?
2 seems more smash and grab than the first team. Yeah, from what I've seen.
Yeah. I did tell you I was going to have a legitimate answer after putting you on your toes a little bit. So I'll give you that first, and then we'll get into that. I think it's almost impossible to replicate the first team on the second team because of the individual talents of some of the guys on the first team. You know what I mean? You're never going to have a Pauletts in your TFC 2 team. You're never going to have a guy though, and players that are singular like that have a way of shaping the game around them, and the game will never look the same if you just have to use a baseball stat like games above replacement style midfielder in that position. The game just looks so much different. It's not a plug and play sort of situation. So for me, I understand what you mean about the smash and grab sort of element, but structurally for me, I see a lot of the same similarities in the two groups. Like
Okay.
they generally play with a back four. The wing backs are very much involved in the attack. They have central holders. They have width in midfield and in attack. Largely possession based. Passing game. Have intricate passages. Sometimes a little too intricate and end up losing the ball. You get runners from midfield. Mobile strikers who can interplay. Like that's very much. Those are the high level attributes that
That are shared. Okay.
Yeah. And as much as you want those two teams, you sort of alluded to this, as much as you'd love those two teams to be exactly the same, you're playing in different leagues against different opponents,
Yeah.
And that's always going to have an element of that's going to always impact how things look. It's never going to be that perfect match. And so I would tend to look for the similarities in that ethos rather than specific X's and O's. And then
Love it.
on top of that, you're also going to have, this is one of those big conversations that always happens in sport is, do you go to an opponent and impose yourself on that game? Or do you go to an opponent and adapt to take advantage of their weaknesses, and when you're playing against different opposition, there's always going to be a little bit of tweaking that happens. So when you're on the road in Chattanooga and you spend 8 hours on the bus and you just kind of want to get out of there, there's a little bit more. I think you're allowed to be a little bit more smash and grabby than if you're TFC proclaiming to be one of the best teams in the league and you're going into Cincinnati and you should impose yourself on that game.
Absolutely. That's such a fair point. That really is. Yeah. Cool. I mean, you answered that question fabulous. Let's get on to the happy stuff. Let's do men's national team.
Well, perfect timing. Kyle Larin just scored for Besiktas against
nice.
Sporting
Thanks,
Lisbon,
Yvonne.
So he's back in form and also looks to be back and healthy. But obviously he wasn't there on a pretty historic night for the Canadian men's national team at BMO Field as they defeated Panama 4-1. Arguably kind of an all-time game for Canada in terms of just the way it played out, the atmosphere, everything about it. How big of a win was that for the program, and also just in terms of World Cup qualifying, considering where Panama is and how much of a threat they've suddenly become in terms of the those final spots.
Yeah, I keep getting notifications on my phone. That's why I keep moving my hand. Yeah. I mean, when I was thinking about this, the words that came to mind were that it was a validation for all of the effort and for the risks in the approach that they took to this, and that there was a little bit of the well-deserved praise and attention going forward that the team sort of needs to continue building what they're doing. By validation, what I mean is that if you're Canada and you're going into the final phase of World Cup qualifying for the first time in 20 years or whatever, it takes a little bit of attitude to not be dreaming and say you're going to make it to that World Cup. It takes a little bit of fortitude. It takes some self-belief, but it also it's a bit of a risk to go out there and approach the games the way that they have. And so to emerge from these first two windows with the points that they have, I think it'll give them the belief that those risks that they took paid off and that they have a bit of a path forward and they know themselves a little bit more going into this next round. I would caution that we're still pretty early in this whole thing. It's 6 matches.
Not even halfway,
Yeah, 6 of 14. Too many, if I'm looking at this really critically, too many of those games have been draws for me to be like, bouncing around, jazzed on the results right now. The Honduras one, maybe you can say
haunts our nightmares. Yeah,
the results in Mexico erases that. The result in the U.S. erases that. That's all well and good, but you still have a lot of tough teams coming here. You still have a lot of difficult away trips to make, and you still have a lot of teams that have not shown their best, and that as things get desperate, we're going to see some very different things from very different sides. And so it's way too early to be celebrating anything, but I think there will have been some validation given to Canada for their willingness to go out there and approach this as equals rather than just being happy to be there. And then for too long, Canadian soccer and specifically men's Canadian soccer has been very much in the background and very much undercovered in this country here. And so, the morning after to see every single media outlet and national news outlets sort of hopping on the bandwagon was incredible.
Pretty terrific.
I think
Yeah.
we've all sort of been here. We've been, toiling in the soccer mines for the last decade or whatever it is, and so to finally see a little bit of that sunshine come in is wonderful for everybody involved. And that brings extra pressure, though. That's more eyes that are going to be on them. That's more conversations that are going to be had. It's more speculation. It's more media requests. It's all of that. And still, I think you have to welcome it. That's what you have to do if you want to be a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think you just went mute, James. You just muted out a little bit. I don't know what happened. Try us again. Oh. He's gonna log back in. Maybe. Okay, I'm gonna boot him, and then when he logs back in, I'll add him. Yeah, I mean, no, device is not connected. I'm gonna pretend that's not distracting me. What was I gonna say? What James was saying is very interesting to me because now the pressure's on. Do you agree, Mitch? Like, we got what we wanted. Everything's gone viral. KJ's video of the shenanigans of the CONCACAFery, got something like 100,000 views in 5 minutes. That Fonzie goal was everywhere. It's wonderful, but now they got to measure up to that expectation.
Yeah, you can look at it that way. Now the pressure's on, but also now they have so much momentum behind them where
and confidence.
Yeah, where they won't, like, there's not a single team in the region now where they'll look at them and say, we can't beat you, because they've come very close or beaten basically every team now. So I do think it goes both ways. I tend to, again, there's always a bit of skepticism and worry when we're talking about the Canadian men's national team. It might never leave, just based on how many horrible matches and how many
PTSD. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But with that being said, like that game in particular washed a lot of that away for me, just in the fact that it was like even if there's more pressure on them now, that game in particular, there was so much pressure. It was as must win of a game as this group under John Herdman has ever played. So with that being said, like the fact that they did so well, again, conceding early,
coming back.
James mentioned that, like how different this Canada team looks when they concede early, and how they just doubled down essentially after that and made sure that even though they conceded, they weren't going to be the next to concede and they were going to tie the game. Like, all of that factors in to make me pretty confident in what this team's doing. And yes, they still need to go to San Pedro Sula. They still need to play Mexico at home. They still need to play Costa Rica at home. There's a ton going on, but I find it hard to be too concerned about the pressure this team might come under.
I mean, I'm concerned about how many more exponentially Facebook posts there's going to be about the games not being on Sportsnet now that everyone wants to watch them. But this is what we asked for. But I do think it's a double-edged sword. I think with this added attention, and it's coming from places that we're it's insane that we're getting this attention, right? There's going to be more expectation, and what I get confident from is that we've seen this sort of ramp up, right? Every time we've met that will Fonzie be a diva, or is he going to be okay with getting triple marked? Well, the answer is yes. We've been pleasantly surprised at every stop on the way. So history would suggest that we're going to be pleasantly surprised by how this team deals with being under the microscope in a much more profound way.
Sorry about that, guys. I thought I fixed my Wi-Fi issues after last time, and this time it was a phone call that sort of threw me off.
No worries.
The final thing that I would add, though, is something that you sort of touched on right there, which is that that win against Panama provided a platform. That's the foundation for them to do whatever it is that they're gonna go on to do. It's a platform to qualify. It's a platform to further garner more attention, but it's just got to be the start, though. This isn't a finish line. That win, it's got to be the start of the next thing. You know, that's how they've approached this World Cup qualifying cycle. That's how Herdman has approached everything since he's been involved. And so, you know, it was a lovely win, and it was a nice day out at the park. And, you know, let's hope that there's many more of those going forward.
Yeah. Another interesting point I wanted to make on this, and if you haven't yet, you should definitely go read John Molinaro's sit down with former Canada captain Julian de Guzman, where he talked all about the national team. And he made a couple of interesting points, but one of the ones that I thought was so interesting is that this pressure is actually super important for the national team, because for so long, you know, he'd come into the national team, and even if he cared as much as he did, like, he'd look at it like a vacation. You know, I'm coming in, we're going to play Aruba and some far off thing, like, whatever happens on the field, there's no pressure. No one cares what happens. And like, now it's like a club team. Like, these guys know they're coming in. These are important games. And you know, there is that pressure there that's going to make them play better. And we've seen a lot of guys elevate their performance significantly. We talked about Osorio and Richie Laurent. They're certainly not alone in terms of guys who've elevated their performance. So I thought that was so interesting that pressure's actually probably helped Canada a little bit, in the sense that now these guys are caring a lot more about these games and just what it takes to pull on a national team shirt.
Did you I'm sure you both all caught that extended Herdman interview where he talked about how important the New Zealand sports systems are, and spit some hot truth about what was it, the Suriname game, where there was like some dust ups in training, and he was like, this can't happen, we got to be a unified force. It's very impressive what Herdsman's done. It's incredibly, it's just this collusion of all these great factors, you know, and everything all signs point to up and onward and upward. The Davies goal, does it deserve all the hyperbole that it's getting?
I don't know. Deserve is such a loaded term, you know, like, does anything deserve anything? You know what I mean? Like,
we just went deep. Yeah.
And so much has been said about it already that, like, I guess what I would add to it is, like, we all knew how fast he was. You know, I kind of felt bad for the defender, because you knew the second that Davies sort of, you know, honed in on that ball being in play, it was done for that defender. He wasn't getting that ball no matter what he did. That said, you can't switch off and be casual the way that he was. So that's the first part of it for me. The second part is that, you know, what I took away from it was something that you alluded to there, was that it would be really easy for a guy like Davies to come into the national team and think that he's already made it. You know, he's in the FIFA Best 11, he's a Champions League winner. But when he saw a chance to make that extra sprint and to put in that extra little effort and maybe get rewarded for that, he did it. You know what I mean? Like, it would be so easy for a player like him to just say, "Nah, I'm gonna let that ball go out." But he had the desire, and maybe that's emblematic of the whole team and emblematic of the whole group and emblematic of what Herdman has tried to instill in the group, is that when there is an extra inch to go, these guys are going to go it, and that makes such a world of difference in a business where inches matter, you know. And No, go ahead.
Well, TV's so powerful, right? And that profile shot where he just sort of swoops in, takes the ball, leaves the guy on skates, and then just leaves the frame. It's one of the best editing. Like, there's no coverage that matches that one shot, because you just see the absolute despair on that guy. And then you cut to Fonzie, and he's already like 18 yards. It was just a masterclass in whoever was calling, you know, camera 1, camera 2 on the day in the truck needs a Juno or a Cannes Screen Award immediately.
Further to that, I think that goalkeeper was beat as soon as the ball stayed in. Like, that goal was scored on that touch line in a lot of ways, because the goalkeeper, I think, was stunned. I think he was thrown off that this attack was coming his way, and I think what's been lost, and, you know, granted, I haven't dove into the hype perhaps the way that some people have and seen every inch of coverage of it, but I don't think we've talked enough about what kind of a finish that was. I mean, it's not easy to cut in on a goalkeeper like that, and, you know, your mind's racing and the situation is what it is, and to just cut it back like that and just
Yep.
completely wrong foot an international class keeper. And that was the sort of finish that we saw Sebastian Jovinko do at BMO Field a lot of times, where the keeper is expecting you to go one way and you just slot it the other way, and the keeper is baffled at how it got past. And then it was I think the thing that I'll take away from it was it was almost the perfect expression of the confidence that this group has ridden to this point in the World Cup qualifiers. And so I think
Yep.
that's where I'm going to put this goal, as sort of a signifier of where this team thinks it is, and maybe where it can be.
Yep.
Yeah, that roar at BMO Field when
Was ridiculous.
Fonzie got to that ball is something that I'll absolutely never forget. Like, it was unbelievable.
I also won't forget the mood when we conceded early, because like there was a malaise, but it didn't last. You know what I mean? Like, everybody got it out of their system pretty quickly, and then it was like on to the next. There was this mob confidence that it wasn't over yet, and that they hadn't, we'll give you that one, but you ain't going out of here with a win or even a draw. That I was so fascinated with. I mean, I've been to both MLS Cups, and I like 2017. I didn't think we had it. I thought we were in for another 2016. I went out halftime, and my buddy was like, "No, we got this one. Like, we're playing them off the park." But I didn't feel it. But that Canada game, I felt it. I'm like, this isn't over yet. Before we get to our last,
it's a little bit intangible, which always makes it really hard. But we spend so much time these days talking about the data and talking about the X's and O's and the tactical parts, that I think we really overlook the emotional intelligence part of the game in a lot of ways. And
I agree.
And the same things that have held TFC back in a lot of ways are the same things that Canada has flipped around in the other way. And so, I'm not disparaging stats, I'm not disparaging tactics, but they're facets of the game, and that extra little 5 or 10% that a team who's feeling it can get from themselves is the difference between the New England Revolution and Toronto FC this season.
100%. 100%. We'll probably save this for the next time we have you, but I do think what's coming in the mail is dealing with these super clubs that our players are playing for now and keeping them happy. And that's a problem that we haven't had to deal with very often, right? Fonzie's missing games for Bayern, right? Like, eventually there's going to be a dust up between their front office and ours, because CONCACAF is this intangible thing, and it's got this horrible reputation internationally. And he's one of their money makers, and I do think that eventually, if not in the next little while, we're going to be faced with the dark side of our guys playing for such big clubs, which is the necessity of keeping those people happy. Which segues into what I think maybe should be our last question, because we've been doing this for a while. But everyone is talking about big moves overseas for some guys on the Canadian men's national team. Let's play who goes where and who goes next, right? I do think Richie's regressed a little bit, so maybe his European adventure has been delayed for a year. We all know Tejan is on the next train to Europe. Who's next?
The train.
Okay. System of catapults and nets.
I have no idea, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm not a big transfer speculation guy, like, in the sense of we can talk about the possibilities, but so much of it is speculation and wasted energy in a lot of ways that I sort of check out of it a fair bit. Like Richie, and this is where my sort of general wishy-washiness gets a hold of me, is, yeah, you can say Richie hasn't been lights out the way that he was last year, but maybe that's as much because he needs the next challenge as it is that he's, bottomed out or something like that.
Sure.
Sometimes guys get bored, and, we saw Kyle Larin, he wasn't exactly tearing it up with Orlando, and he needed to go abroad to find that next sort of gear to boot himself into. So I think Richie has to be on that list. But for me, again, part of the reason why I stay away from this is so much of it depends on player availability and club.
Yeah.
And so it's never a straight line sort of thing. But if you're asking me who I think is the most likely, and I think where this all is coming from is we were all on that Herdman call the other day, and John was asked about But if he was concerned at all that the next international window was when MLS was out of season, and he sort of dropped that, he expected
He's
a
like,
bunch of guys
MLS
to be,
what? Nah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, John, what do you know that you don't know? So I looked through, and like Richie is obviously one of the candidates. Does Max Crepeau go over to Europe? Has he earned himself that chance? Kamal Miller, Dr. Johnson. I think both of them could find a level over there. They're both still so young that it's hard to be like, they're really ready for it. Osorio? Does Osorio want to test himself somewhere else? Liam Fraser seems like he's got some possibilities for him. Sammy Piet, there's always those sort of rumors, and this is just me listing MLS guys that were on the last roster.
I mean, Sammy's not a pencil-in starter for Wilfred Nancy's CF Montreal anymore, right? And then
Ayo wasn't in this squad, but he's also a guy that's been linked over to Europe a lot.
True enough.
If I had to pick one guy who made the most sense for me, it's Mark Anthony Kaye.
Yeah,
and there was something odd to me about that move to Colorado. And like
I agree.
Made a certain amount of LA maybe didn't need another midfielder or whatever, but there was also that sort of maybe the word was out that Mark was looking to go to Europe and he wasn't interested in re-upping his MLS contract, and so it was best to get something from him while you still could.
Yep.
And maybe
Arsenal trade him to Colorado. It's a quick step over to a little club in North London that I have a certain affinity for.
Do you get GAM? Is that a GAM move or a
No, it's a damn move because I like Arsenal. But no, that's a great shout. Mac's a great shout, actually. A really, really great shout. Because there are.
Sorry. And of course, adding to this as well as the fact that we expect Canada to be in the top 50. The next FIFA rankings, which of course has significant implications,
visa ramifications.
Both UK players actually coming in for future national team camps in terms of where they'll be allowed to travel to, as well as the fact that it's now much easier for them to get work visas over there. So there's a chance we might see
so arbitrary. Like why does that exist? That makes no sense. Like if you're ranked at this level it's just it's just such a weird stat. Yeah.
And we also know on the John Herdman thing, I mean, we always believe national team managers when they're talking about transfer speculations at camp. With Greg Berhalter earlier this year. I mean, it's only natural,
And that's part of why I try not to get involved in this transfer thing, because we can get pulled in all sort of directions and manipulated. So just tell me when something's signed and I'll deal with it then.
Nice. So you are not doing a podcast with Fabrizio Romano, then, is what we're saying here.
If he wants to, I guess I could join him. But I don't think I'd have too much to add.
Exactly. What do you think about this one, James? I don't do that sort of thing. Man, we got to rethink this podcast situation because you're. Anyway, that's it. I'm out of questions. I think you won the game. You're at about 7 million points.
Wow.
So yeah.
I don't know if we've been scoring other interviews, but that's probably a record. So you've been more than generous with your time, James.
Thank you so much.
I'll just wrap it up here. Thanks so much to everyone for listening and watching. Your feedback and interaction is always so appreciated, especially when we can't watch the Champions League games and need the updates during them. But also, as always, it's been just great to have James on and get to pick the brain of one of our favorite soccer people. So make sure you go check out his work at torontofc.ca and make sure to go check out our MLS Prediction League over at the Parlay. Are we doing well? No. Are we having fun doing it? Yeah. So that's good at least. But on behalf of Jeffrey P. Nesker and I guess James Grossi as well, I'm Mitchell Tierney. Till next Tuesday.